Hey Ronnie, all right?
Oh, hi, Andy. Yes, yes, I'm recovered from my roast spuds just about.
Yeah, I mean, and Roger moaning that you're late, yeah, before him.
I know. Yeah, I got home and I was so knackered after eating all the roast spuds that I fell asleep.
I
And
knew you was having a nap. I'd guessed. That's what I thought you were doing. I thought you were having a
yeah,
nap.
that's what happened. Yeah. Yes. So how are you? Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good, thank you.
Jolly good.
So yeah, I think we're going with the shack today.
Yes, that's
That
right.
was kind of
Yes,
what was voted for last week. I'd completely
that's right.
forgot about that. In fairness, I was kind of thinking we were going with the vegan society, but we'll
Yes.
take up from that
I,
next
I
week.
mean, yeah, I forgot about it as well until you know, uh, you and Roger reminded me. I mean, I wasn't all that much involved with SHAC, although I kind of, yeah, I was in touch with people that ran it, and I kind of kept my eye on what was going on. But at the time, SHAC was active, or most active. Louise and I were involved in running a campaign against the greyhound racing industry, so we were very much focused on that.
Yeah,
But a hell of a lot of animal rights campaigners got involved with SHAC. So it's I mean, and there's that book being published fairly recently, "Your Neighbour Kills Puppies" by Tom Tom Harris, who
yeah.
was involved with SAC. I think he was sent to prison for a while in connection with it.
Hello, people.
Hey,
Hi,
Roger.
Roger.
Oh, Jennifer's just arrived. She's your bum's biggest fan, Ronnie.
Yes, but I don't know whether she'd be a fan of my bum now. That photo of my bum was taken about the best part of 20 years ago, I think. So I think,
So what you're telling people is that you're catfishing your bum.
yeah, that's right. Catfishing my bum.
I
It's
don't,
my
I don't know. I
profile.
don't know why it's called catfish. Is that speciesist or
I don't
what?
even know what that means. What does that mean?
So
No.
catfish is where, like, so you'd put up like a picture of yourself, or maybe not even you, but you'd allow people to think that it was you.
Oh, I
So
see.
basically,
Right, yeah.
you trick them with an image that wasn't you, or with a personality, or with an idea of someone that isn't really you.
Yeah,
And
Andy, do you know the Ronnie bum story?
I've seen the photo.
Well, the thing is, when we did it on the live, I kind of had a video, so it was spinning around with
I,
that kind
I,
of.
I I remember. I
Yeah,
remember it happening. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, that's right.
that's
It was
right.
my
Because I
yeah.
can remember it being requested for a while before it was actually shown. Yeah.
People will wonder what the hell we're talking about on here, won't they?
So it's a different shape now, Ronnie, is it?
Well, it might well be 20 years later. 20 years of sitting on it might have, you know,
Yeah.
kind of distorted the shape of it from when that photo.
No, you don't know. I mean, retro is a thing now. It might
Yeah,
be more
back to your
valuable.
pelvic thrusts and all that.
Oh, I've forgotten what they are. My age. Yes.
Well, you can do it as an exercise, Ron.
Well, I don't know whether that. I think I'd do myself an injury at my age, even doing it as an exercise.
So, so before we start kind of introducing what SHAC actually is, would you say like a modern day fair comparison of SHAC would be the MBR campaign that's currently ongoing?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, basically, the idea of SHAC was. I mean, it was a campaign against the laboratory called Huntingdon Life Sciences, which is in Cambridgeshire near Huntingdon, here in England. It's not called Huntingdon Life Sciences anymore. It's now called LabCorp. I think the name changed, or possibly even who owned it had changed since the days it was Huntingdon Life
Yeah,
Sciences.
didn't they take over Hazelton as well, Ronnie?
Yeah, there's more than one LabCorp. There's a, there's one there's one at Shardlow that does experiments on fishes in Derbyshire, for instance. And yes, I think I think
Well, the Hazelton one will be in Harrogate, right?
yeah, I think they took them over as well. Yeah, so there's at least 3 lab corps, and then there's a company called Envigo, and they're in Leicestershire, and I think they're related to LabCorp as well. So there's quite a few that are kind of, you know,
Yeah, because Hazelton became Covance, didn't it? So
yeah, I think it did.
Why do these testing companies change their names all the time?
It might be that they're bought out by other companies, because I think LabCorp might be a USA company.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, LabCorp. So they maybe bought out these other companies, and that's why the names changed. But HLS, I think before HLS was LabCorp, I think it was kind of something else, as you know, before the latest name occurred. But you do, yeah. I mean, a lot of the names of these laboratories that I kind of was familiar with back in, say,
They were founded as, I don't know whether you pronounce it as Roche or Roche Biomedical.
Roche, yeah.
Yeah.
They're a Roche. They're a kind of pharmaceutical company, Roche, aren't they? But
So yeah, that's who they were founded as. But they've got just looking at their Wikipedia quickly, they've got like 5 subsidiaries as well that all own different businesses, all revolved within the pharmaceutical sector, but kind of different things.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that going on. But the names of all these places are different to what I remember them sort of back in the 70s and 80s. And that's probably because they're now owned by different companies. They've been bought out by someone else. But I think they're still carrying on doing the same stuff as they've always done, still carried on doing the experiments on animals, obviously.
It's almost like makes you a bit suspicious that there's something dodgy going on. That they have to keep changing because.
I mean, without kind of, I don't know, casting any accusations at them. Usually, when a company changes their name, it's because they're avoiding like a CCJ or something like that, isn't it? You know, well, they don't want that debt responsibility, or they don't want the negativity that's been attached to that name.
I mean, it kind of could be that, but of course, in the world of business, the world of corporations, you do get these companies taken over by other companies or sold to other companies. That happens quite frequently anyway. I mean, the nearest sort of laboratory to us, that what they call a contract testing laboratory, because Huntington and Life Sciences and now LabCorp, and I think it's the same with the LabCorp in Harrogate, which was Hazelton originally, and a few others. These are contract testing laboratories. In other words, that companies will pay them to test their products.
I'll have to give you my Richard Adams anecdote at some point in this series. Not now, obviously, but.
So the one that's nearest to us is a place in Ledbury in Herefordshire it's now called Sequani, but that originally was called Toxicol, and then
they've always got weird names, haven't they?
Yeah, Toxicol.
Well, there are always things that don't make you think at all about what they do.
No. I mean, anyone going past Sequani now would think it kind of looks like some kind of. People probably think it was something to do with a company that produced a bit like B&Q, a bit like a kind of B&Q type place, if you see what I mean.
Well, slaughterhouses are like that, though, aren't they? They're often disguised, aren't they?
That's right. But that they were taken over by Toxicol was taken over by a big American company called Quintiles, who do loads of different stuff connected to pharmaceuticals. Although actually at Quintiles they weren't just testing pharmaceuticals; they were testing all sorts of products, like kind of cleaners and all sorts of stuff like that as well. And then what happened? There was a campaign against Quintiles, which was kind of Louise, my wife. She kind of was was the kind of the person that started the campaign and ran the
The
campaign
chief
to
troublemaker, as
other
usual.
people. She kind of was, yeah, and it was successful in that because what they did was because Quintiles was a big company. They had the laboratory, but they had other outlets as well. They had different places all over the country that did all sorts of stuff to do with the packaging of drugs and all that kind of thing. And so that there was a lot of pressure points where pressure could be exerted on them, and there were people doing that. And in the end, they announced that they were pulling out. Quintos said, "Right, we're pulling out of this laboratory," and so everyone thought, "Oh, brilliant! Well, this is a great victory." But what happened was there was a management buyout. The management bought out the company and changed the name to Sequani and carried on same as before. So it was a big disappointment, and that's
Yeah, I mean, literally, Sequani could be anything, couldn't it? It could be a company that makes paving slabs.
It's the name
It's
of
just so detached from what they actually do.
it's the name of a tribe, apparently.
Because I mean, at the very least, although it's kind of not obvious, LabCorp makes you think of like labs at the very
It does.
least.
Oh, yes,
There is some
Sequani.
connection
Sequani.
there, but Sequani is just like it could be anything.
Well, they chose that name. It's really strange. It's the name
Well,
of
I would imagine it's purely for exactly that reason. It's got no attachment to anything that they do, and it just kind of blends into the background, especially on like paperwork forms.
And the interesting thing is that I've been involved in the people do protests outside that laboratory, but they do also do stalls in the town centre. To educate people about, what's going on there and, about animal experimentation in general. And there's loads of people that actually live in that town. It's quite a small town. Squani's on the edge of the town. A lot of people there don't are really shocked when they learn that that's an animal research laboratory. They just didn't know. They go past it maybe every day and didn't realise what it was.
Yeah, well, it makes sense, to be honest, and it's not like I mean, some of these slaughterhouses, for example, they're kind of like kept out the way, but once you walk past, you can usually hear the sounds and smell. Whereas I suppose a place like that, you wouldn't even know what they did.
You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know what it was, and that's why people. I think more people know now because there are protests outside.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But only because of that exposure. I mean, they could potentially launch a new site in a new area tomorrow, and it would take some time before people worked out.
No, it looked like a kind of hardware type warehousing sort of place. That's the kind of thing you probably maybe guess that it was.
Yeah.
It was a French tribe, Ronnie.
Yeah, French tribe. Yeah, that's right.
What does it mean, though? What does it translate as? Does it have a meaning, or was it just their name?
Sequani. It sounds almost like a sort of Latin type name, but I don't know whether it was a French tribe at the time.
I think it's something to do with river.
Yeah, maybe it was, but that's it. I mean, how they came across that name, I kind of really don't know, unless someone was kind of particularly into that. Who was involved in the laboratory, was interested in.
So is the ownership French then, Ronnie?
No. Well, as far as I know, it was the management. It was a management buyout, by the management that worked at the company, because basically Quintiles owned they had loads of places all over the country. They had the Sequani, they had the laboratories now Sequani. They had another animal research testing laboratory in Scotland. But they had offices at Bracknell in Berkshire, I think, and they had lots of other outlets where they did different things. So there's a lot of places where pressure could be exerted on them. And basically they I think they thought, well, it's just too much aggro to sort of have this laboratory, you know.
Something to do with the River Seine. The Celtic name for the rivers, so it's really tangled. It's a French word related to the Celtic name for the River Seine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Yeah.
Well, it makes no sense to me.
So I'm glad
Well,
it does to you because I ain't got a clue.
In terms of where the
I'm glad
name,
one of us
I
knows
thought
what
that
it's
this
about.
was interesting though, just whilst I was looking on LabCorp's website. So according to them, they got this section that says myth versus fact. And it says fact. More than 95% of the animals used in basic biomedical research are mice and rats. Rodents are the most frequently used species to test the safety of new medicines, although government regulations require some testing in non-rodent species. Mini pigs are beginning to replace the use of dogs in some type of research and look to outsource the use of dogs by the end of 2027. So they're not stopping vivisection.
no,
They're changing species.
exactly because they know that.
Yeah, that goes back to the ICA, doesn't it, Ronnie? With they changed.
But like, for example,
Yes.
are MBR aware that that's the plan?
I mean,
Because it kind of makes all of their campaigns pretty fruitless.
without doubt they are. But I suppose, for as long as they can make a profit out of it.
Surely the only way that they can continue their campaign essentially is to make it anti-vivisection. Because obviously, I mean, they in 2027 are they going to kind of leave and say, "Well, result, well done."
I mean,
Because it literally is, the campaign is literally free the beagles, right? So I mean, potentially if they stopped using beagles and replaced them with mini pigs, well, job done.
I think there's that there's a lot of questions to be asked about these campaigns in terms of what the actual outcome will be, and also looking back at the past to see what's happened historically with these campaigns, because I think there's a lot to be learned from the SHAC campaign in different ways. And kind of how it, I mean, to kind of going back to sort of how it all started. I mean, obviously, for many years there'd been protests outside places that carried out animal experimentation, and there was, I mean, sort of going back to, when I became involved in the animal rights movement in the 1970s. You go back before then, what you kind of had, prior to the 1970s, in fact, there were very few protests actually outside animal research laboratories. Here in the UK, there were two main organisations campaigning against animal experiments. One was the National Anti-Vivisection Society, and sorry, there's a cat wants to come in the room. And the other one was the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection. And they were mainly about campaigning towards Parliament, asking people to write to their member of Parliament, for instance. That was kind of, I think there was some degree of local campaigning with them, but not very much. And then we got to the 1970s. That was the sort of when the animal rights movement kind of sprang up, I suppose, and there's a lot of grassroots campaigning, and I think that's when people began to kind of protest more outside laboratories and that. And then there was the ALF that took direct action, mainly against suppliers, establishments that supplied animals for experimentation. But what there wasn't really, to any great degree, I mean, it did happen with the ALF, I know, with some laboratories in London that were constantly under attack. But it tended to be a very kind of scattergun approach. There wasn't any kind of concerted effort on any particular establishment aimed at closing that establishment down. And then that kind of changed, though. I suppose perhaps I don't know whether it would be later on in the 1980s into the 1990s, where the idea of actually making a concerted effort to close particular places down began, and it began with the people that were breeding animals for experiments. It's an interesting. There's a website actually called. I'll just find it about the SHAC campaign. Just have a look on my phone. It's called the SHAC Justice Project, and they talk about it was really in the late 1990s that this kind of really got going, and there were campaigns against various places that bred and supplied animals for experiments. There was a place called Consort Beagles, I remember, which I think was in Herefordshire, and there were constant protests outside the place all the time, and I think the idea of kind of contacting the places that supplied these establishments in various ways, various things they needed for their survival, that began as well, and there was a whole string of these places that closed down as a result of that type of pressure campaigning. There's Regal Rabbits, there was Shamrock Monkey Farm, Consort Beagles that I've already mentioned, and one very well known one was the Hillgrove Cat Farm, which was in Oxfordshire, place that bred cats for experimentation, and there were a lot of protests outside there, because I know you took part in one of those, didn't you, Roger, where you were kind of received injuries from the police?
I certainly did.
Yeah, but that closed as well because the pressure exerted on the place. The guy that ran that place also had a bed and breakfast business, and I think there was a lot of pressure put on the guy's business, to stop people from supporting it, and all this kind of thing. And so these places were closing one after another. And I think with the Regal Rabbits campaign, all that happened was people announced that they were going to have a campaign, and the place closed down. I don't think the campaign really had to do anything.
I think the campaign was about 36 hours long or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that. You see, so because they knew what was coming, because they'd seen what had happened at previous places.
But these were small targets, weren't they, relatively?
These were all places that bred animals for experimentation. So relatively small in the scheme of things. But then the people who were kind of mainly involved in these campaigns then decided to go for Huntingdon Life Sciences, which was which was much bigger. Was much bigger in the scheme of things. This was an actual laboratory rather than a breeding place, and there was an existing campaign against Huntingdon Life Sciences, and there'd been a protest camp set up outside the laboratory, and basically what happened was the people who'd been running the campaign against Hillgrove, the cat farm, kind of moved in and took over the campaign against Huntingdon HLS. And called the campaign SHAC, Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty, and kind of started doing the same thing that they'd done against the other places, but in a bigger way. And that was kind of putting pressure on suppliers, all the people that supplied HLS with everything it needed to keep going. People that kind of went in there and did the cleaning, even people that supplied the toilet paper to the laboratory, the people that the phone companies that supplied them with the phone services, the banks offered them banking facilities, their stockbrokers, and anyone that had anything to do with HLF, their pressure was put on those people, and that's kind of that it was very successful. A lot of these places pulled out, and we're seeing the same thing happen now with MBR, the place that breeds the beagles for experimentation. Once again, this is a place in Cambridgeshire where and Camp Beagle is there. People have set up Camp Beagle outside there.
I suppose the question I would ask was, just hypothetically, you get in touch with like the toilet paper supplier or the bank or any of these things. Are they simply just shifting to another pharmaceutical company though that are testing on animals, or are they actually taking into account animal testing is wrong and no longer contributing to that?
Well, I think it's. I think basically.
I guess you said quite simply, is the question cutting the supply, or is it simply just moving it somewhere else?
Well, those other places will already have their own supplier of those things. And that may or may not be the same company. Say the company that was supplying, supplying HLS, for instance, with say toilet paper, right? That company, they may or may not have been supplying other laboratories with toilet paper, but the campaign was to stop them from supplying it to HLS. And because those other laboratories will already have had their toilet paper supply, won't they? Whether that would be that same company or a different one, if you see what I mean. I'm just using that as an example of one one small item that would be essential for. I
suppose it's more about inconvenience than anything else, isn't it? It's just you're creating day-to-day problems.
It's to cut off all the lifelines, all the things that the company needs to operate. And of course, the big success, or it could have been a huge success, that the SHAC campaign had was they managed to persuade HLS couldn't get banking facilities with any bank, no bank. Their bankers.
Yeah, be careful here, Ronnie, about describing that as a success, because the Bank of England stepped in.
Yeah, the reason it wasn't a success was because, and it was unprecedented, it had never been done before. The government, allowed, persuaded, or whatever the word is, the Bank of England to give banking facilities to HLS, and the Bank of England doesn't normally do that. It doesn't give banking facilities to any particular company or individuals. This was pretty much unheard of, and it was because the government.
It was the Blair administration that did that, wasn't it?
It was a Labour administration.
These big animal welfareists.
No, I mean I know it's a question that maybe you potentially can't answer, but was that a decision based on the financial implications or the scientific ones?
I think it was based on the pressure. You're dealing with very powerful industries. Basically the vivisection industry is very wealthy and very powerful, and
it's also globalized, isn't it? So it's not as though they're going to say, "Well, look, we're going to be driven out of this massive globalized market if we're not careful."
Well, I think what it is
because that's what I'm getting. Because you'd think if it was purely like a scientifical point of view, worst case scenario, us not having this technology wouldn't stop it from being discovered and enhanced and all those other things. You just buy it afterwards, right? So it has to be
you're taking money out of the country, aren't you, Andy?
I think it's to do with the power of that industry. And them being able to kind of have the ear of the government because of the kind of political bias and economic bias that the government.
But would you say in that case that they were actually better off to have the Bank of England backing them than a traditional private bank?
Well, it just meant that they didn't have to worry, because what happened was their existing banker, the bank that that gave them banking facilities withdrew, and then they took up banking facilities with another bank, and pressure was put on that other bank, and that bank withdrew. And so in the end, none of the high street banks would give them banking facilities. You see, so and that would have normally meant they go under. You can't operate without banking facilities. But the government said, "Oh, we're not going to allow this."
Oh,
right?
yeah, it's like a state bailout, wasn't it?
It's state bailout. You see, but that only happened because the government kind of kowtowed to pressure from the vivisection industry, and the government only kowtowed to pressure from the vivisection industry because of the nature of the governments. If you had a government that was like kind of much more, sympathetic to, the plight of our fellow animals, they'd have said, sorry, we're not going to do that.
But that's the hub of the problem, though, isn't it, Ronnie? That it's kind of like too soon and the wrong way round.
Yeah. Yes. You see, that was the problem, that in that they, basically what happened was the SHAC campaign eventually was crushed by the state. The state using various measures to destroy that campaign, because you're basically dealing with an administration, that run, a government that was human supremacist in its nature, and so they're going to prop up, animal experimentation, aren't they? And they're going to kind of, take measures to make sure that people trying to end it are silenced or locked away. And of course, quite a number of people involved in the SHAC campaign were sent to prison for really, quite long. Some of them for long periods of time. And so that's kind of what happened. What actually happened in the end, because I think what it was. I think what they were worried about was the kind of domino effect. In other words, if HLS had closed, then obviously the campaigners involved in that would have gone on to another target and would have focused on another laboratory. So somewhere the government felt that it had to make a stand. I mean, the government didn't intervene to protect, the Hillgrove cat farm or the consort beagle breeders. They didn't intervene to protect that, or regal rabbits. They didn't intervene to stop those businesses going under. But because HLS was a much bigger player, in the vivisection industry, and I think because there were even bigger players than HLS worried about the domino effect, thinking, well, if HLS closes, are we going to be next? And you're talking about huge. You're talking about people like ICI, Shell, these huge corporations that carry out experiments on animals and have laboratories. And they'd have been watching, and they'd think, well, look, this has got to be stopped. This type of campaign has got to be stopped. And that was where they made their stand, was with.
Yeah, it's kind of like really the fact that our real problem is the fact that we're operating within a deeply speciesist position. If you look at SHACjustice.com, they've got a tag which is called conspiracy, and it's got the conspiracy, and it goes through like a timeline. And it's basically what you're saying, Ronnie. 1999, Glaxo, SmithKline, a big. Well, I mean, that was three companies that came together. They threatened to leave the UK, and so the Chancellor was Gordon Brown, and so his budget in 2000 was based on an expansion of the research sector, of which about 25% was animal research. So that's all that kind of government money involved, and so eventually they came to this thing where SHAC was having an effect. So they decided to demonize the movement, and then the last entry here is 2005. Tony Blair vows to end SHAC. In a memo leaked to SHAC from Tony Blair's office, the Prime Minister pledged to do, quote, everything possible, unquote, to solve the animal rights problem within a year. So while he was banning hunting, he was trying to smash the anti-vivisection campaign.
Well, Tony, I don't think Tony Blair particularly cared about banning hunting. I think he was kind of forced to. I mean, hunting wasn't banned.
Well, I think the history of Tony Blair is he didn't care about anything. Really.
Both of them have got political motivations, right? So you're pleasing the general public with banning hunting for the most part. Obviously, you're displeasing some people, and I would imagine a huge portion of his political campaign was probably paid for by these companies who then say, "Hey, we helped you out. It's time that you did the same." Because I mean, people forget that something like 11 or 13% of Boris Johnson's political campaign when he was elected was funded by the pork industry. So how much say do you think that they've got when he makes a decision? Because that's quite a bit of power.
This is pointing out why these campaigns ultimately always are bound to fail.
Yes, because they can buy out, they can have politicians or whatever in their pocket, and you can't do anything about that.
No, I mean, if your opposition can buy politicians, what can you do?
Nothing, because even if you manage to get it to those places like Parliament, you're not going to win still. Same as if you manage to get it to High Court, for example. If they can buy barristers or magistrates at the same time, then you're never going to win because the system is rigged.
It's a little bit like a bigger thing. Like we've talked about, the SABs would end up in court in front of magistrates who were hunting on the SABs that they were arrested. And it's a bigger version of that, isn't it?
Yeah, and that still happens today, right? Yeah.
I think the thing with hunting is although yes, I mean that still does happen today, and legislation against hunting is very weak anyway, and is not properly enforced at all. You kind of have that situation, but you've also got a situation where hunts are going under, hunts are closing and combining with other hunts, so that there's that means there's less hunting going on because of that, and probably a fair amount of that is to do with pressure from hunt saboteurs, and that would definitely, there'd be other factors as well, but that'd be one of the factors in all that happening. And yet the government hasn't stepped in to protect hunting. It hasn't stepped in to protect hunting in the same way that it stepped in to protect HLS. And I think that's because the kind of hunting, I don't know whether you could call it an industry, but the hunting fraternity, say, aren't able to exert the pressure on governments that the vivisection industry was able to exert. You see, and you've seen the same. I mean, the fur trade.
There is an interesting variable in that, Ronnie, in the sense that hunting is supposed to be bleeding banned.
It's supposed to be banned, but you see, but you see, in terms of and the fact that even it was so-called.
In other words, the government can't really be seen to prop up hunting if they might want to. And the Tories are always been talking about repealing it and everything. Yeah. But I mean, they can't go too far because Parliament banned the bloody thing.
Yeah. But even let's look at something that was kind of an industry that was very much diminished before. We've got a ban on fur farming here in the UK, which dates back to, I think, is it the early 2000s when fur farming was banned over here? I think it was. But prior to that, the retail fur trade had already been decimated, largely because of direct action. But the government didn't step in to protect the fur trade in the same way as it stepped in to combat the anti-vivisection campaigners. I think that was because the fur trade just didn't have the political and economic clout that the vivisection industry had.
They did end up giving fur farmers millions of quid, right?
In terms of the fur farmers, well, yeah, I mean they all got compensation, but in terms of the sort of retail industry, like the number of department stores that had fur departments and then got rid of their fur departments, a number of like fur stores, fur shops that closed throughout the country, is a huge number were allowed to go under, and the government didn't step in to protect them.
Well, I mean,
but that also going back to like the the HSL stuff. Why didn't they step in with like the cat farm then and pay them out?
Because they didn't have the. Well, I think for two reasons. I think first of all because those places, you know, in the scheme of things, they're relatively small businesses, and whereas HLS was a lot bigger, that was a huge step up in terms of the power of who they were taking on. I think that's the first. I think the second thing was that it kind of, when the campaign started having so many successes against HLS in terms of persuading the suppliers to withdraw, that's when, and it looked like HLS could close, and that had been a real biggie. I think that's when they decided, right, these people have got to be stopped.
I think it might be something to do with the lineage as well, Ronnie, because I think something like Hillgrove might have taken the government by surprise, because the last kind of event at Hillgrove, which kind of closed it down, really, I mean, the place was kind of, you know, brought to the ground almost. The guy's house was completely smashed up. I mean, there was hardly anything left. They'd put a big fortress around it with these big kind of impenetrable fences, which the activists still got through. I don't think the state realised how kind of passionate, you know, vegan animal rights people were. You know, I mean, they were launching themselves at these barricades, and eventually they came down. And I suppose they kind of learnt their lesson. You know, at the same time as we took on a bigger target, the government had said, blimey, you know, these people really mean it.
Yeah, but it took a while. I mean, there were a lot of suppliers withdrew from HOS before the government stepped in. But I think it was the bank. It was really the banking facilities, because that was the real big one. Without banking facilities, you can't operate a company.
Yeah, but they solved that, didn't they, with the Bank of England?
Yes, that's right. But that was the first time that they actually stepped in. The government actually stepped in to just kind of bail out HIS.
Well, I suppose in some weird kind of neoliberal kind of way, they've got to almost kind of pretend that they believe in the idea of a free market and everything. And you know, in some senses, it was a question of you just let it kind of evolve and happen in a way. But then, see, I think that the SHAC campaign is almost an interesting illustration of the Richard Gale thing I talked about. Now, he's a sociologist who talked about the way that movements and counter movements interact with the state. Normally what happens is the movement creates kind of, you know, an issue in the public mind, or kind of social turbulence, you might say. And then the state interacts with the target. So the state would interact then, you know, in this case with the laboratory, right? And say, you know, what can you do, kind of thing, that we can then present to the public to kind of calm their fears. But in some senses, the SHAC campaign kind of stepped aside from all that and started just doing stuff, you know, which the government couldn't control. And I think that's why they eventually decided that the only thing we can do with SHAC is destroy it.
I think that's true, and I think that you're kind of, in terms of sort of the oppression of other animals, you've got three really big areas, you know, of that. I mean, the biggest is the exploitation of our fellow animals for food. You know, the farming and animal farming and fishing industries. I mean, that's huge. You know, these are huge, you know, powerful enterprises. And the next one down is to do with harm done to the environment and natural world by human activity. You know, the kind of all the fossil fuel companies and all of those. And we've already, you know, we see the power that they exert, how hard it is to get any proper measures to combat the climate crisis, you know, because of the power of these, you know, of these industries. and I think the third one is animal experimentation. They're the kind of big three. Outside of that, I think you can probably put industries. You can knock these industries out, but once you kind of get into that big three, that's when you're gonna get problems with governments.
Yeah, but that explains why they didn't intervene with the fur thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, because they weren't powerful enough economically. They didn't have enough economic or political power.
Well, yeah, just on that note, just from what I was looking at. So according to this, we still legally import £100 million a year worth of fur, and they reckon half as much again, so 50 million is illegally imported. So it's still a pretty big industry, and it tells you that even
but that bit wasn't ever banned, Andy.
Sorry?
No. See, the thing is that wasn't what kind of and selling fur isn't illegal. So somebody could lawfully.
But also processing the pelts. I mean, our comic friend Michael Cobbledick said that, which is the fact that he took the government money in compensations, expanded his operation in Europe. As you were saying that before, Andy, that he ended up getting compensation yet again. But he was always able to bring the pelts back. So he would kind of grow the mink, as it were, in Europe. He would kill the mink in Europe, then bring them back to England for being processed.
He maintained probably all of the same business links that he wanted to maintain from his original fur operation in the UK, I would imagine, yeah.
It comes back to what Ronnie's always saying, is the fact that if you've got a government which is, clued in and sympathetic, then it's a completely different ballgame, because they're not going to pass a hunting bill which is full of loopholes like this one did, and they're not going to pass a fur ban thing which is a load of shite, like what's happened. Is because we've got to tackle cultural speciesism first, otherwise it's never going to work.
No, I think this is the problem. I think these campaigns hit the buffers, you see, and it's interesting to see that kind of the same things happen with MBR acres, the beagle breeders, that, that campaign now is adopting similar tactics to SHAC, where they're contacting suppliers, people that supply, like the people that were supplying them with gas bottles, I think it was, for stuff that they need. They pulled out. They've said, right, we won't do it any. And they've had success with persuading a few companies not to supply to.
But Ronnie, isn't the problem with MBR acres what Andy was saying, which is we don't actually know what they want? I mean, do they just want to free the beagles?
See, I think I mean, it's the idea. I mean, what they want to do is want to close the campaigners want to close that place down. That's their certainly their.
Yeah, and then what?
Well, you see, this is the difficulty that and on various levels. Like, first of all, and it's a kind of supply and demand situation, because basically the reason why beagles are being bred at MBR is because there's a demand from laboratories for beagles to be used in experimentation, and that's why that place exists, because they've got there's that market available to them. And so if that demand continues the same and MBR acres closes, what will happen is the beagles will just be supplied from somewhere else. And indeed, they get supplied from other countries. The big beagles flown in to this country from other countries for use in experiments. Or they may switch to, if there was a shortage of beagles, then they would switch to another type. What there is there's a certain category of experiments, and it's only quite a small percentage of all experiments that are done that kind of have to, by law, have to be done on animals. And I think it's stipulated that they have to be tested on two types of mammals. I think one can be like a rodent, rats or mice, and the other one has to be another sort of mammal, which is where you've got this business about the mini pigs being, the lab corp talking about mini pigs being used instead of beagles, because they have to use another type of mammal according to the law. So, of course, if you stopped, if there are no beagles for experimentation, then there are other animals that they could, and I'm sure would, experiment on. So that's the other problem. Beagles can be supplied from somewhere else, and if there were no beagles, they can then switch to experimenting on a different sort of animal. So this is the kind of, the difficulty with it in terms of actually achieving any sort of real victory, in a sense. And this is what's kind of. But the other factor is what that I kind of needs to be taken into account is what I would call the sort of generalized effect of this type of campaigning, because if we go back to the ALF and the height of the ALF campaign, which to a considerable extent was focused on animal experimentation. But if you kind of look at the kind of what sort of happened during those years in terms of the vivisection industry, and if we sort of if you look at, say, 1976, when the ALF actually began, the number of animal experiments in the UK, well, according to Home Office figures, was over 6 million. And after 10 years of the ALF campaign, you go to 86, that figure had fallen to 3 million. There'd been this annual reduction in the number of animal experiments by 3 million every year, so to speak. But it kind of carried on like that anyway. So to what extent was the pressure exerted by the ALF on the vivisection industry responsible for that decline in the number of experiments? You see, so that because the ALF did succeed and played a major part in closing places down.
Yeah, but what about globally, Ronnie?
Well, this is what we don't know, because of course it is a.
No, I mean, essentially, we're talking about moving, pieces around the chessboard. So they reduce because of the ALF in Britain, and then they transfer to mainland.
Well, it's a question of what's going on in that 3 million reduction annually. What's happening instead? What's happening instead of those experiments that would have taken place in the UK? Yeah, I think. I'm sure there would have been some of them that are done in other countries, but
I mean, do you think sometimes in the activist mind there's a kind of bit of NIMBYism going on? Because whenever I talk to people about the banning of the fur farms, and you point out the fact that the reality is that most of it just gets transferred to Russia or China. The argument then is, well, at least we've got it out of our country. Well, that doesn't really solve it from.
Well, it's a similar argument in relation to live exports, isn't it? That those countries that were receiving live exports from the UK of animals will now just receive them from other countries instead, and those animals would have still undergone very long journeys. So
it always comes back to the still alive conclusion that we've got to stop cultural speciesism before we can do anything meaningful.
Well, that's right. Although what I would say is I'd say that this kind of where you've got, say, talking about that reduction every year of of 3 million in animal experiments. How much
in one country, Ronnie? In
one country, but and there's kind of only there's sort of two reasons why that would be reduced. One would be the experiments are being done in another country, and two would be that they're using non-animal methods instead of
The other part of this is, I would imagine that quite a few of the same people that say, well, I'm glad it's not in our country anymore, are the same people that would say, the UK, it's got the best welfare standards in the world. Right. So surely by default, by conceding that it's going somewhere else, you're recognising automatically that the welfare is now inferior. Because you can't have it both ways.
No, I mean, I think we can't. I wouldn't be able to say that none of that reduction was due to animals being replaced by non-animal methods, and that probably is part of it. That probably is part of the reason for the reduction. How much of the reason it is, we don't know, but I would concede that some of it is probably to do with that. And so
I mean, it's like an equation that's too complicated to work out.
I mean, to go back to the cobbledick example, right? So you take the argument that, let's say, just for argument's sake, the UK does have the best welfare standard, or had the best welfare standards when it comes to fur
Every
farming.
country claims that, though, right?
Yeah, I know, but just for the sake of the argument, the UK was number one or whatever. So automatically, when he moved to Denmark, those conditions were reduced. And then Cobbledick got his second payout, second load of compensation, and those mink were again moved to China or Vietnam or whatever country it was, where yet again you could argue that treatment would have got worse. So from the victim's point of view, nothing's changed about their actual situation except the welfare has got progressively worse, and Cobbledick has just won.
I think what we see in this country, I think far fewer people now wear fur coats. I mean, where fur tends to be sold over here now is in terms of trim, collars and that kind of thing on garments. And this is where there are, there's anti-fur campaigning, isn't there, outside places like flannels and Canada Goose, as we saw on the Animal Rights March. Because they're using. I don't think Canada Goose produce full fur garments.
No, it's just a trim on the hood for the most part.
It's being used. So I think less.
Same with there's a couple of, I don't know the brands off the top of my head, but I know there's a couple of brands of shoes or boots that have like a fur trim around the top of the boot.
So there's less fur in terms of you don't get the full fur coats.
No,
I imagine the mink in the farms are going, well, I'm only being used for trim, so that's grand.
Yeah. But it's a question of, if it would mean that fewer of those animals are being used because the amount of fur worn over here now is massively is hugely less than it used to be, and then it's just a question of what are people wearing instead of that fur, because if they're wearing if they're wearing leather instead, for instance, then that's no real progress has been made. And it's this
we've always got this element that we're moving pieces around in a chessboard, haven't we?
Yeah, I think I think that kind of as with the animal experimentation, I think it can be said yes. There has been some effects in the reduction of the number of animals used. But it's not as great as it would have been.
But the only thing that gets the fundamental wrong, as you keep saying, Ronnie, is vegan education, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing that you kind of.
Because I mean, even going back to MBR, right?
Everything else is a sideshow.
We do know what their long-term aim is, and they are actually anti-vivisection. Well, the name doesn't help people recognise that in any way, shape or form, does it? They're literally camped outside a breeding facility, not LabCorp.
But are you sure about that, Andy? You said before about the fact that all these stats about, that the overwhelming number of our fellow animals that are used in vivisection are so-called rodents, right? Mm-hmm. Now, how many of the people who are campaigning to end this beagle supplier would then transfer their attention to rats and mice is the real. It's a difficult.
This is what I'm saying. But surely we have to recognise that. I mean, the best thing that they can do actually is just kind of educate people to go vegan. But if they want to stop this, they need to target LabCorp. They need to be an anti-vivisection group, because all that's going to happen, even according to the website of the company that they're targeting, is they're looking already to transition from swapping from beagles to pigs. So they're going to come to a decision whether they like it or not in a few years' time.
This is what happens all the time.
About pigs.
You know, because we're in a speciesist culture, it means that the solution is to transfer to a species which is less popular with the public.
Yeah. Because otherwise, if they are they going to just change their name to Camp Piglet?
I think had that facility bred animals other than beagles, there wouldn't be a camp outside.
Well, that's concerning for the future, though, isn't it?
Well, it's a bit
because
of a
I mean,
scandal
it's
from
basically
that
telling
point,
us that even the potential animal rights activists are still speciesist. And so if they did do that, let's say LabCorp brought that forward and they changed it from tomorrow and they no longer used beagles and they used piglets, it means that there probably wouldn't even be that campaign. No.
Yeah.
So in terms of awareness, we'd regress.
To be fair, you know, the literature and the sort of petitions that have been produced by Camp Beagle have been opposed to animal experiments in general. It's not just to do with the.
But then surely the camp should be outside LabCorp and not a beagle breeding facility.
Well, I think you see, you know, historically, what happened? There were protests now and again outside that place.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I've taken part in one of the ones that they've done at LabCorp before, so I know that they do. But what I mean is that camp, the kind of permanent presence. That should be at
hang on a
LabCorp.
minute. I mean, go back to Nam. The chant was "Free the MBR Beagles."
Yeah. Yeah, it was. It wasn't free animals from labs or free animals from vivisection. It was free the MBR beagles, which at the very least creates the idea that if that was the case and they swapped beagles for pigs, job done. Which I'd like to think absolutely isn't the case. I mean, that's what the messaging suggests.
It's a terrifying point, that the fact that how many of the people would just go home if that happened, right?
Well, I know a couple of the people that are involved who wouldn't, but I can't speak for the others.
I think what it's done is it's attracted big people because it's dogs, and you know people have dogs in their own homes as companions. It's attracted people who care about dogs.
So as weird as this question is going to sound, is it actually in the best interests of the other animals that dogs continue to be tested on, just so that people pay attention to vivisection? Like if you were a rat, for example, you wouldn't want dogs to be replaced with pigs because nobody cares about you already, and they'll care about you even less if dogs aren't included. That's what the information is telling us.
I think it's kind of what it acts as is an attractant to, you know, you've got people who are outraged because, you know, these dogs are being bred for experiments because those people have a dog in their own home, for instance, and they then go along to Camp Beagle to protest against MBR acres, and they rub shoulders with people at Camp Beagle who are vegan, people at Camp Beagle who are opposed to all animal experimentation, and then those people in terms that initially went there because it's dogs, then become vegan and become opposed to all animal experimentation and indeed all exploitation of other animals. I mean, you know, I think that's happened with quite a number.
Well, how does that work when the claims making is all about the beagles, Ronnie?
Well, on one level, the claims making is just about the beagles, but I think the kind
of I suppose it works.
Campaign.
Yeah, I suppose it works in the same way as when people have like the banners and you come over to the stall, right? And the first bit is essentially clickbait. That's the beagles. I mean, I don't want to refer to them as clickbait, but that's what it is. That's the thing that brings people there. Yeah, and once they start having a conversation with vegans, obviously, That part
Yeah,
makes sense.
I think it's that, and I think that that there are kind of spin-off. There's spin-off campaigns that have come from Camp Beagle, and some of the spin-off campaigns are because there's been disputes at Camp Beagle, and people have split off and done their own thing. And a lot of those are just against all animal experimentation. It's not just beagles. So it's kind of sparked off a revival in the anti-vivisection movement. Really, Camp Beagle. That's what's happened. And so there's a lot more anti-vivisection activity now than there's been for many years.
Yeah, but isn't it, Ronnie, that what's happened is the anti-vivisection movement has been transformed into an anti-beagle testing movement, and so to what extent is it very clear to the public or to people joining the campaign that this is an abolitionist campaign which is opposed to all animal experiments and not just beagles? And so, or is the idea to kind of sucker them in and then reveal it?
Well, I think that's kind of in practice what's happened. People have gone along there because they think it's horrific that beagles are being bred for experiments, and then they've learnt more. They've learnt more about everything that goes on.
Yeah, Wildlife and Who in the comments says, try to get more people by pulling at the heartstrings over dogs. So I suppose that's the strategy, isn't it?
Well, I think that's kind of what's happened. I mean, initially, I think it may have been much more raw than that, where people, went along there. Basically, how Camp Beagle started was there was a protest outside. There'd been protests every now and again outside there. And there was a protest outside there, and some of the people said, right, we're going to stay. We're not going to go home. We're going to stay here and carry on our protests. And that's how the camp was. It started off by someone just sleeping in their car, I think. And then a camp got established for a permanent presence to be there. And it continued like that.
So the campaign started by a breakdown, did it?
Well, by someone saying, right, no, I'm not going to go home. I'm going to stay here till the place closes or whatever. And
the worrying part that we've all touched on is the fact that if it had been a rat and mice laboratory, nobody would have ended up.
It wouldn't have been. There wouldn't have been the emotional pull of it because
Why not? Why not?
Because I think because humans look on dogs differently in general to.
Including vegans.
The demonization against rodents is huge. I mean, there isn't really any demonization against dogs other than certain specific breeds, and we do see that demonization in real effect. I mean, just in the last 2 years or so, the XL bully breed has been completely demonized. We've seen breeds like the German Shepherd, the Doberman, the Pit Bull. These have all been demonized over the years to the point where public accept that. So that's the, I suppose, speciesism within speciesism, where we've got a nation of dog lovers.
When the BUAV was radicalised in the early 80s, they tried to challenge that head on by putting out a lot of posters and T-shirts and badges in particular with the slogan "Rats have rights."
Yeah.
Right. I know you don't see that kind of stuff anymore, do you?
No. No, in fact, some of those pictures that you were sharing before, there was a big group of people that all had that "Rats have rights" sign, and that's literally all it said. Yeah, I don't think in my lifetime I've ever seen a sign that said something like that. Not for rodents anyway.
I think the bottom line is that however much is achieved by pressure campaigns in terms of reducing the number of animals that are exploited and oppressed, it's kind of very limited. It's very limited and can only go so far. Can only go can only go a very limited way in terms of achieving animal liberation. And so that's why the problem has to be tackled at a deeper level. And I'd say that, fundamentally that has to be through vegan education, through outreach, because until we kind of change the culture and thereby change the politics, there's always going to be this problem of governments stepping in to shore that industry up, as they would, the same kind of thing happened against the meat industry, the dairy industry, those very powerful industries. The same thing would happen from the government.
Well, I suppose the other variable that has to kind of be brought into the equation as well is how many of these companies, for example, those that are cosmetic based, that aren't required by the government to do specific testing, now just rely on the computer enhanced models rather than paying the money to use animals. And so that reduction is just kind of natural progression as opposed to anything to do with campaigns.
That reduction could be accelerated through protest because these people think, well, if we go down the road of animal experimentation, we're going to get a load of aggro.
Yeah.
There's more pressure on them to
well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense if they can, obviously, if they're government constricted in terms of you have to do this and you have to have this certificate, there's not a lot they can do. But if it's a case of they can use a computer generated model, yeah, it would avoid all of that hassle, wouldn't it? It would mean that you're not going to get targeted in the future.
Most experiments that are done on animals it's not mandatory. It's not mandated by law. It's only a fairly small percentage. And that makes sense because you're alienating a percentage of your customer base that you don't need to as soon as people find that out. Yeah. So I think that it's the problem is that it's kind of limited. The number of animals that can be spared by these campaigns is very, very limited, and like eventually you kind of hit the brick wall of the state, and it'd be interesting to see.
But I mean, just taking that into consideration, so the vast majority of experiments that are being done are government mandated. So surely the answer to the question is you have to sort of campaign against the government to remove that mandation. Otherwise, you're wasting your time asking the companies to change.
I think it's the other way around. I think that there's only a very small percentage of animal experiments that actually have to be done on animals by law, and so a lot of it's not.
Well, I thought all in terms of all medication did.
No, I don't think it is. There was an interesting thing. I don't know where it is. There was a thing we received from Animal Aid that went into it all, and it showed that only actually a percentage of so-called medical experiments have to be done on animals.
Oh, I didn't realise that. I was under the impression like a huge amount, like pretty much all.
No, it's not. It's quite. I was surprised because I thought the same as you, but that it seems that's not the case. So a lot.
In that case, then actually a lot of this medication that people are talking about may well have not been tested on animals. In fact, despite the fact that they're led to believe it has been.
Well, it may.
I was under the impression like everything that you consume pharmaceutical wise, not necessarily like lotions and stuff.
I think they do it, but they carry out these experiments because it's what they've always done.
Right. Okay.
Out of habit, really.
So they are still tested, but they're not mandated to be tested.
Yeah.
Right. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh well, we've gone way past the hour, so we managed that just fine.
Oh yes, I had no, I had no worries that we wouldn't fulfil it now. Have there been any questions?
No, not any specific ones that I remember seeing. If I've missed any, please feel free to retype them.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen any either. Because I was going to point out a few minutes ago that we're over the hour, and so we should be taking questions now.
Yeah, no, I have been watching for the most part, and I haven't actually seen any questions been asked. So,
I mean, a few people are making points. Alex saying education is essential, and this is true. Otherwise, I tell you what, a real difficult question for all of us, I think, because I bet you that all three of us we've kind of clicked on, click like on, MBR stuff and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, would we say that, you know, in the final analysis, it's a bit useless? Because that's what I think.
Yeah, I can't help but agree. I understand that it's spread awareness about things to people that may well have not known about them before, but it's spread awareness of the wrong kind. It's perpetuated the speciesism that we're looking to challenge. It hasn't kind of brought
It's
us to
kind
the
of
forefront.
using speciesism to end speciesism, isn't it?
Yeah.
You see, I mean, I used to do something. You know, for many years, I did kind of stalls around the West Midlands where it was about protecting whales and dolphins and petitions. I think one was aimed at Norway, and the other one was aimed at I can't remember now. So long ago. You know, one of the other countries involved in whaling, and of course, loads of people would be attracted to the stall because everyone cares about whales and dolphins. I think one was to do with the Faroe Isles, you know, and that's I don't know whether that comes under Denmark. You know, to do with they have this annual slaughter of I think it's pilot whales they're kind of technically dolphins, aren't they? The Faroe Isles. It was and attracted a lot of people, but and what I kind of basically did was they used that in order to educate people.
It's the Faroe Islands where Paul Watson did his action.
No, it's Greenland.
Oh, right, okay. Because that's
Yeah,
decent. Okay.
I think that's.
I think it does fall under Danish jurisdiction. I
No,
think
it was arrested in Greenland. It was to do with Japan, wasn't it?
It's
Japan.
a warrant for Japan for anti-whaling activities a decade ago in the Antarctic.
There was a big thing in Japan because that Pete Bethune guy was involved. You know, the guy who kind of declared that he had to have a ribeye steak on the plane on the way back because he was so desperate and all this kind of crap.
Yeah.
I remember that.
And this was at a time when, I mean, this is 20 years ago, when Sea Shepherd wasn't really a vegan thing. It was a conservation thing. And then Watson kind of tightened up on that and made it that when they were out at sea, they were a vegan boat, you know, which is an interesting kind of position to be in. But he was basically saying that, you know, that's because, you know, cows have become the main predators of sea life. Yeah. So it's all based on sea life and conservation, really.
Absolutely. But I think so my position on things like, you know, MBR and all that is, you know, I'm not going to deny that those campaigns result in some animals being spared. I'm prepared to accept that. But I think if we really want, you know, widespread and fundamental.
Well, transferred is not spared, Ronnie.
Well, no, but I think if you kind of where you measure the success of these campaigns is in the generalized effect. In other words, has this campaign, you know, contributed to reduction in the total number of experiments on animals? That's how you judge the victory. And you know, one interesting one you see, it'd be interesting to see what and you know, I take your point about that could be that some of these experiments are transferred abroad, but we can't say that all of them have been. And I think,
but I mean, like everything else, globalization affects everything.
Yeah, but I think we'd still have to concede that it's likely that some of it was to do with non-animal methods being used, because there's loads of non-animal methods around. It's just that they're not taken up because of the tradition of doing experiments on animals. So
yeah, you know, sometimes non-animal methods are brought in for scientific reasons, not anti-vivisection reasons, right?
Yeah, but you see, but the thing is, in order to exert the pressure for companies to take those where they've traditionally always used animals, for them.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, Ronnie. The pressure is good science, not necessarily anti-vivisection.
Yeah, but you see, the pressure, you know, exerting if it's kind of, if it's made uncomfortable for these companies to do experiments on animals, then they're more likely to look at to look at non-animal methods and more
Well,
likely.
as Andy kind of indicated, it's going to be the fact that they're going to abide by what is the legal requirement.
Yeah, but you see that, but in most cases, it's not the legal requirement to do animal experiments. It's done because that's how it's always been.
No,
done.
and that then could indicate the fact that it becomes increasingly not a legal requirement because the better science is the non-animal stuff.
Yeah,
Because,
but you see, but where you've got people doing experiments on animals when they don't actually need to by law, then it's a question of like, does that pressure on them because they're doing animal experiments force them then to say, right, okay, we are going to move to non-animal experiments?
yeah, well, that's a kind of weird kind of Hans Reusch type thing because he argued in Slaughter of the Innocent that anybody can cut up a rat, whereas if you're having to kind of deal with a sophisticated computer program, then you're going to kind of need a PhD in a brain, kind of thing. So there is that, I suppose.
You see, because I think my position on these things is a kind of unless position that okay, there's all these campaigns going on that may make some difference. It's going to be really quite a small difference in terms of things.
Your position, Ronnie, is that it'd be better off if all those people were doing vegan education, isn't it?
Well, yeah,
That is the only way to get what they want, though. That's the thing.
Yeah, but I think the thing is, I think we kind of have to look at the reality of the situation. Is that a lot of people are drawn to these campaigns, and I think it's an emotional thing. And
Yeah, that's why my concern is that potentially if they do change the species to pigs, that this campaign will lose all its momentum. Obviously, over the next 3 years, those numbers will gradually reduce year on year on year anyway as they look to phase them out. And then let's just say, for argument's sake, at the moment, they test on 5,000 beagles a year. Well, how do we know that in 2028 they're not testing on 10,000 pigs because there's no more pressure on the same campaigns going on anymore, and therefore there's not the same level of restriction?
I think you kind of have to look at the sort of overall figures, for all animals, and what was interesting was that the latest figures I think we have in the UK are from 2022.
Yeah, but you kind of hit a wall as soon as you say in the UK, Ronnie.
Yeah, in the UK. But what I'm saying is that there are two reasons why that reduction would have occurred. One, experiments being done in other countries, or two, non-animal methods being used instead, right? And so I think it could be argued that some of it is because of non-animal methods being used. We don't know what percentage that is. But that I would be very surprised if that wasn't the case, if that didn't account for some of the reduction, if you see what I mean. And what's interesting is that the figures from the figures in 2022, which came out last year, it was the lowest number of experiments since 2006. So that's interesting, and that kind of coincides with the resurgence of the.
Yeah, but interesting in what way, Ronnie?
Well, interesting in that reduction kind of coincides with the resurgence in the anti-vivisection movement because we haven't had. You
just said it might be nothing to do with that.
No. What I'm saying is we don't know for certain, but it kind of coincides. It coincides with that. It's just that when we look back in history, that the huge reduction of in the figures for animal experiments in the UK that occurred between 76 and 86.
Even from a capitalist position, right? I mean, like if you can bring in a situation where you don't have to have massive breeding programs, you don't have to have all these animal technicians, you don't have to have all these holding units, and you don't have to have all this transportation of other animals all over the place. I mean, that in itself is a cost-cutting message.
Yes, that's right. But you see, I think what you're dealing with is you've got the problem of tradition and people carrying on doing what they've always done, because of course you'd think that like if all these new methods are being brought in all the time, that what would happen just that there'd be a steady reduction year in in animal experiments, and that kind of hasn't really been the case. That hasn't.
I thought you said it was the case.
No. The figures for 2000 and the figures for 2022 were the lowest since 2006, which meant that since 2006 the numbers had risen, and then now they've fallen again.
And is that to do with what, COVID or
we kind of don't, well, we don't know what it's to do with, but it's just interesting that the recent fall in the numbers of experiments coincides with the resurgence of the anti-vivisection movement, because like we do know that with in the years that the ALF say was most active against animal experimentation, there was a really big fall in the number of animal experiments in the UK.
In the UK,
so there's that correlation. I mean, we don't know to what extent that fall was due to the experiments being done abroad instead. We don't know to what extent it was just because, other methods were being used instead of animals. We don't know. We obviously we don't know the answer to that question. You see, but you see, my
what we do know is the benefit of people going vegan. That's the point, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, and I think my position is that kind of rather than sort of kind of getting into disputes with people who are kind of adamant in campaigning against vivisection and kind of trying to get them to become vegan activists instead. I think my position is like an unless position to say, look, okay, so what you're doing, may well bring about some relatively small improvement, but if we are going to achieve animal liberation and widespread fundamental animal liberation, the only way we're going to do that is through widespread vegan outreach. So it's an unless position. Unless that happens, we're not going to achieve animal liberation. And so I'm interested in, what I want to see is people, to persuade people to incorporate, vegan outreach into their campaigns, to get them to incorporate an element of vegan. Like if someone's doing a stall against vivisection, to give people leaflets about veganism as well at the same time, that kind of thing. And that, that's the sort of thing. I mean, that's exactly what I did when I was doing the stalls regarding the whales and dolphins. I used to give people, information about veganism, people that came up and signed the petitions and stuff like that. So I kind of used that as a way of attracting people that at least cared about some animals. And
I think the core, the people that are there all the time, are vegan, aren't they? It's only the non-vegans that turn up for like the bigger days that have been organised.
Yeah, but I think there are some people that are attracted to that type of campaigning, and somehow. Do
you also think, Ronnie, that part of the attraction for some of these people as well is that Camp Beagle provides that one place that's a bit more like a commune, I suppose, or like-minded individuals all being in the same place at the same time, as opposed to just,
I think people do like to go on things where there are a lot of other people there. I mean, I'm not like that. I quite happily do stuff on my own or with a small group of people. In fact, perhaps I prefer to do it that way, but that's not what most people are like. People like to congregate in large numbers, don't they?
No, I'm not a big fan of it either. But I've seen some of their like nighttime lives and stuff when they're sat around playing guitar and that kind of thing, and I just get the impression that might be quite inviting to some people.
Well, there's
not the whole community vibe of it.
There's not like a huge number of people that are permanently at Camp Beagle these days, but it's there as a kind of where people can come and go. And then obviously there are bigger protests.
Is it 4 years this summer they've been there permanently, or 3?
3 years.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of, that's what I kind of.
Well, let's go back to what Andy was saying about the fact that the core people there are the vegans, right? And so they must realise that what they're doing doesn't amount to a hill of beans.
I think that there are people that kind of look at kind of maybe you're chipping little bits off this kind of edifice of the oppression of other animals, and I think they kind of look at it
rather than getting to the heart of it by going vegan.
Well, I think I think they as you say, these people are vegan themselves, and they're keen for other people to go vegan. But I think that kind of, I think certain types of campaigning for sort of psychological reasons attract different people, and because that's a big emotional thing. It's very difficult to kind of,
Well, don't forget, there are some people at Camp Beagle who say, if you call this a vegan campaign, I'm leaving and all that kind of stuff. So you do have a bit of anti-vegan feeling within that campaign as well, which is a bit weird.
I think it might be. I don't know too much about that, but it might be because they're worried about. They want to attract non-vegans to the campaign.
I think so. Yeah.
They worry that might.
I agree. This is a really kind of complicated conundrum, really, for campaigning, because obviously you want anybody that's supportive, but there are kind of, there are just kind of like.
Well, that's just part of the problem when you confine yourself in a single issue, though, isn't it?
But it's not. I mean, it's kind of not just just to do with animal experimentation. I mean, if you look at the Save movement, where they go outside slaughterhouses and sort of protest outside slaughterhouses. Well, that's kind of the same, isn't it? They're not kind of going to where people are on the street or to community events and educating people to become vegan, are they? And so they're going to they're kind of, and so they're kind of similar to Camp Beagle in a way, and they're similar to the people that protest outside MBR Acres, because they're going to the place where the animals are oppressed.
It's complicated. Let's bring it for the last few minutes, because we're over time, really. But back to SHAC, Ronnie. I mean, like people like Greg Avery, right? I mean, I've been looking at the SHAC documentation, and he's almost not a name that's mentioned anymore. So, I mean, what's going on? Was it the fact that he got such a big?
Well, I think they were kind of banned. I think some people were banned for life from campaigning against vivisection.
But how come he's invisible from the history of it now?
I kind of don't really know, because he was a really main player in SHAC.
And just very quickly, because I had one question before we end on the SHAC. So what brought Jake, as in Cranky Vegan, into SHAC? Like, how did he get involved with that?
Because
SHAC USA, don't forget.
They were SHAC groups all over the place, in several European countries as well, putting pressure on, people that supplied SHAC.
Or was it just kind of like he learned about the UK one and a US one was founded?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think there was it
was like a franchise in a way.
Right, with you.
There was a few people in the US.
Because I just wondered, because obviously SHAC has got Huntington in the name, right? So
it was all connected with that. It was all connected with that particular laboratory.
Yeah, but didn't Huntington Life Science have USA? I mean,
they had some connections over.
No, they had laboratories over there, didn't they? I mean, SHAC USA were actually targeting targets, so they must have been.
Or whether they were people involved in supplying the HLS over here.
No, I think it might have been that they had labs over there.
I don't really know. I mean, it'll probably say more on the on their website, I would imagine, about all that.
Another kind of general point. I mean, we talk about the 1990s mainly, aren't we? Here.
Yes. And, well, into the 2000s.
Yeah, I remember it was when the first time. I mean, obviously, we talk about 1996 when Rain Without Thunder came out with Francione and everything, and I was asking people about the name. And so people who were kind of sympathetic or involved with SHAC, I was saying, why did that name come about? Because if you eliminated the cruelty, are you just going to go home? And of course, there was two answers to that. Kind of, no, we want to end it all. And the second one was the thing that is very prevalent now, which is that cruelty has been redefined by vegans to mean abolition. Right? So an anti-cruelty position in the modern vegan movement means the abolition of, whereas culturally and RSPCA-wise and compassionate world farming-wise, etc., it doesn't mean that, right? And so it was the first time I was kind of turned on to the problem of the cruelty word, because it doesn't do what we want it to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the view of campaigners was that everything they did to animals at HLS was cruel. So
Yeah, but in terms of the culture, that's not true.
Yeah, I mean, especially in vivisection, right? It'd be very easy for a scientist to say, "Oh, don't worry, we give them this particular anaesthetic first, so they don't know
like
anything."
Blakemore. That I was talking about Blakemore, wasn't I? And he said that my experiments are not cruel because they're asleep all the time.
Yeah. I mean, that's the key part from our perspective. That's still cruel regardless, right? But from the general public's perspective, the cruelty has been eliminated in that situation, which is why the word's problematic.
I suppose from the vegan point of view, cruel, if you end someone's life, that's a cruel thing to do. Whereas I think, if you put it into a human rights context, that's kind of like an injustice.
Yeah.
Like if you were to end a human life before its time, as it were, the first response would be, "Oh, that's cruel," right? Because it's just that vegans, the modern day vegans, have kind of redefined the word cruel, to do a lot more work than it's ever done before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
And that's simply because they've already established that this word exists in most people's vocabulary, and they just hope they've handed this little memo about, basically.
Yeah, but the knock-on problem then is that you just end up having a big argument within the cruelty, and therefore
you're stuck within the welfare paradigm, and you're trying to argue with them about what the word means, and they've been using it for their entire life.
See, it used to be the case where we used to say, well, let's step out of that and not get bogged down in that. Whereas it seems to be that modern day vegans are quite happy to get bogged down in the welfare paradigm.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed quite a lot of people do, and they don't even notice that how it's a problem. But I think it's really apparent when people talk about like cosmetic products, and they'll go, "Oh, you can't just look for the stuff that says anti-cruelty or cruelty-free. It's got to say vegan as well." Right. So you're acknowledging that cruelty is not sufficient, because you're telling them that they have to take a second step to make sure that that product is still vegan, because even though it's listed as cruelty-free, it doesn't qualify.
Yeah,
right. So why are we using that language?
That phrase, I think, Andy, is very damaging. Cruelty-free, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's a misnomer, and it should remind us that that's not the problem. That's not the fundamental wrong. But it doesn't. And I've heard that conundrum. I've heard people that have used that phrase numerous times, and they still don't make the connection. They still revert back to using the same language again, even though they've made that kind of distinction, or make sure it's vegan as well as, cruelty free.
Yeah, Persona said it's really easy to say it's not about cruelty, it's about use exploitation, and move on. Yeah, I think that's right. It's the fact that in some senses, we always saw our job as moving people on from where they were to where we want them to be. Whereas because we've redefined cruelty in the modern movement, we stay there, but then just argue the toss about what cruelty means.
Yeah, and I, to be fair, would argue now that it's not easier. It's easier because that's habitual for you. Just like people say it's easier for them to not go vegan. It's easier because it's what you've always done. But now, after not using that word pretty much at all, or abuse hardly ever in any conversation that I ever have for about the last 3 years, I would say what I do is much easier. What people don't want to do is change. That's the problem. They'll tell you over and over and over again it's much easier to get people to connect with the welfare side of things, but there's not really any evidence to disprove this. It's just what they've always done. It's just habitual. It's just convenient. It's easier than changing and risking doing something else. But actually it avoids all the complications, and if you can get them to connect with the ethics, that side, rather than the welfare, then you've got an abolitionist from the get-go, not a welfarist. So yeah, I'd say it's absolutely easier. You just need to make those changes. And it's also really, I think it's also really dismissive and ignorant to assume that people aren't sophisticated enough to understand oppression and exploitation and use. So we've got to simplify it down in baby steps for them. I think that's just like ignorant of us.
Some people have said to me over the years that the concept of rights is too complicated.
Yeah. Right. Everyone understands them though and talks about them all the time.
I'm not sure, Auden, if when people formulate in their mind why they're against something, I'm not sure they don't go through the mental process of thinking, oh, that is a rights violation and therefore I'm opposed to it. That's not the mental process they go through. That's not the mental process I go through. You know, you're kind of, and I think what you've kind of got to do is to kind of, you know, get people thinking about it. It's the idea of humans regarding themselves as being more important than other sentient animals. So that's the fundamental problem we have, that people will be opposed to something if it were done to humans.
Yes. So if the thought pattern is it's not a rights violation, what is it then, Ronnie?
That where you get people are opposed to, you know, people are opposed to say, I don't, you know, the oppression of if it were humans that were being taken and experimented on in laboratories in the same way as animals are, the vast majority of the population would be opposed to that. But their opposition doesn't come through a process of thinking in their mind that it's a rights violation, does it? It's something.
So what is it?
It's something that they're just opposed to anyway, because, you know, culturally, I suppose.
I just think it's mental gymnastics, because I mean, when you think about it simplistically,
yeah,
you can't imagine. Let's just say we're talking about a stray dog. The idea of someone acting cruelly to that dog can only be conceived that way if that dog has a right not to be treated cruelly.
Yeah, that's right.
If there's no concept of rights whatsoever, who gives a fuck whether you're cruel or not?
I mean, kind of philosophically, yeah. I mean, that's true, but
because there has to be an element of basic rights for you to even think that cruelty would be a thing in the first place, right?
Yeah,
that's unjust.
Yeah, I think what Ronnie's saying, Andy, is that people don't make that jump that you've.
Yeah, no, that's what I think. I think it's the mental gymnastics. So they do understand that there's a rights bearer there, because otherwise they wouldn't recognise the cruelty as being a problem, right? But they don't connect with that idea that they're a rights bearer.
They don't think of it in that language. If you ask somebody, well, like, why are you, you know, if those experiments were being done on humans instead of other animals, would you be opposed to them? And the person would go, yes, I would be. And if you then ask them, well, why would you be opposed?
Our job is to ripen them up to that, isn't it, Ronnie?
They would say, well, you know, I just am. I just am, because that's just the way like our culture operates, isn't it? So what I try to do is then make the connection and say, well, look, you know, why is it you think that was wrong to do it on a human, but not wrong to do it on another sentient animal? And then see what their answer is. And what you've got to do is get them to see that, you know, there is no difference.
Yeah, it's just name a trait, basically, isn't it?
Yeah. There's no you know, that it's just as wrong. There's no reason for humans.
Yeah, Plants and Plates makes an observation. You can violate rights without not being cruel.
Yeah, absolutely. I quite often use crufts as an excellent example of that. I mean, the RSPCA attend crufts, the Dogs Trust attend crufts, Battersea attend crufts, All of these people are there. They spend thousands of pounds on their dogs, and every single one of them is being used and exploited. But the RSPCA don't recognise any cruelty, do they? Because they promote the event. They encourage the event. So it's a great example of rights violations without any obvious cruelty. People who are quote unquote dog lovers will travel all over the country to go to the NEC to go and watch Crufts. They'll pay a fortune to do so. They don't witness cruelty in their eyes. They don't witness anything. They think they're being entertained.
Interesting you talk about the RSPCA, because I wonder whether the RSPCA scheme is based on the idea that, well, they recognise that rights are being violated, but they also think, well, they're going to be. So therefore, the only thing we can do is, whilst they're being violated, we have to reduce the cruelty. And that's what they're focused on.
Yeah, absolutely, which is why I use Crufts as the example, right? Because the RSPCA there, the whole thing is being monitored by vets. So as far as the organisers, the attendees, and the people that are just there as kind of the entertainment, the audience, they're under the impression that there's no cruelty whatsoever. And if there was some secret footage of someone in the back, look at the recent Olympics with the whipping. Well, there's rights violations left, right, and centre. But they only cared about the whipping, right? So it'd be the same at Crufts. If there was someone hitting their dog in some video that was taken, yeah, absolutely, there'd be uproar and outrage. But just standard in terms of performance, no, that's fine.
Yeah, Persona says something interesting. Yeah, but RSPCA don't recognise cruelty in gas chambers. Now, I from what I know, I think that is wrong in the sense that the RSPCA are always guided by animal welfare science, and so that's why they
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, in that instance, the RSPCA at one stage were one of the biggest or the leading organisation that opposed gas chambers being introduced, and they were kind of outvoted.
Well, they oppose them now because the gas chambers have not done what animal welfare science said.
Yeah, they were pressured by Ingrid Newkirk and others to accept gas chambers being introduced, and now they're kind of saying, well, yeah, we told you so. So in fact, the RSPCA didn't really ever advocate for them in the first place. They just went with the flow.
Yeah, which is why I think they're part of 60 groups now who are trying to replace the gas chambers.
Yeah, I think to be fair to the RSPCA, not it makes any difference to the pigs whatsoever. But if you'd have asked the RSPCA at any point over the last decade whether they preferred the stunning method of electrocution over gas, they'd have said yes. I think that's always been their position, and they just literally were persuaded into gas chambers because of the science.
Yeah, so they wouldn't say that though, would they?
Yeah, they would pick the electrocution.
Why?
Because they think that that's a better method than the gas. Well,
somebody like Temple Grandin would say that, but I don't think the RSPCA do, because the science said it wasn't.
Well, I thought in that document, if you read it, the RSPCA are saying they haven't seen sufficient evidence to say that the gas is better than the electrocution. So I would imagine that they're just stuck with the electrocution. I mean, unless there's another method.
Okay, I'm not quite sure which document you're talking about.
It's the one. It's essentially the one that's talking about gas chambers being proposed, and the RSPCA are saying, well, we don't agree. It's like 2,000 words.
I think you'd expect them to be very wary about it, but I mean, like you ended up with a big push towards gas chambers. The animal welfare science was pushing towards it. Peter was pushing towards it, and this was all based on the fact that people doing the stunning with the electronic tongs, I mean, these were human beings, and so they were cutting corners, and so you're supposed to apply the tongs for 8 seconds, and they weren't, right? And so they were basically thinking, well, if we can have a system where human beings are kind of extracted out of it, it's bound to be better, because human beings, kind of cut corners, whereas the machine won't, right?
Well, the problem is that human beings are still in control of the machine, and the problems that they have now are still human-related, cutting corners.
Yeah, but I'm not sure.
For example.
Well, I mean, is it the case that human beings control the amount of length of time that they're in the?
I think what they do to cut corners now, from what like Danny's mentioned and I've read in the past, is especially towards the end of the day, instead of loading 8 pigs into the chamber per time, it'll be 10 or 11. And then they start climbing onto the backs of the other pigs because of how crammed in they are. And that's when the gas doesn't work as effectively because they're higher up.
Yeah, it's always down to the fact that human beings.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I know. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of a tragic thing because Temple Grandin, the animal welfare expert, says that the electrified tongs are the best thing to use. It's just that human beings feck it up.
Yeah.
Because they won't do it properly.
There's that horrible video that I posted about 6 months ago that showed it was an automated electronic tongue system. So it took the human element out of it. So it's kind of, the pigs went down on, like, they were kind of like put into 2 pincers where they were held at like the neck and at the back. And then the tongues were placed on their head. But all of this was automated. It was on like a conveyor belt.
Yeah, I mean, that is an indictment of humanity for a start, isn't it?
I mean, I always think about this, and it kind of like, I suppose it upsets me to the core that you think that it's not just the fact that these machines exist. It's the fact that once upon a time there was a group of people or a whole team of people, engineers, really skilled, intelligent people that sat around a table with this design and concept and said, "Yep, we're going to make that."
Yeah,
without a single thought for what they were doing.
Yeah,
but you know, the same as people made the H-bomb.
I know, but this is what I'm saying. Like, you'd think that we've learned. You'd think we'd have learned better than this, but we haven't, because we're still coming up even now with newer methods
these
to
machines
exterminate
are
life.
brought into. They exist because of the limitations of humanity, aren't they?
Yes, and they're still. I mean, right now as we have this conversation, there are scientists sat in a lab somewhere trying to find some new chemical that'll destroy humanity quicker.
Oh, absolutely. But folks, I'm just wondering whether we should bring this.
Yeah, we should probably wrap things up.
Yeah, and I don't know whether we've probably sort of completed doing SHAC, haven't we? So
yeah, I think so. Unless there's anything specific.
Yeah, I'm completely shacked out. I am.
So I suppose we're back to the vegan society.
Well, I'd like to address Plant and Plate's last contribution, but I mean, I'll suspend that if you want to.
No, go for it.
Isn't the aerospace looking to use argon gas because they think it will be less traumatic for the pigs? But I think argon gas was. See, argon, it kind of like doesn't introduce gas; it takes away the oxygen, doesn't it? But I think all the gas chambers are based on that, isn't it?
It's a very similar system. I don't know what guarantees that would provide over the other one, because obviously it's important. They don't want to render the pigs dead, only unconscious. So they can't, like, I mean, otherwise they just use cyanide, right?
Yeah, but
like,
actually, that raises another weird issue about. I mean, if you look at Joey Carbstrong, Earthling Ed, anybody you like, they always say that the gas chambers kill the pigs.
Kill the pigs. Yeah, I mean, the common slogan that you'll often read is "gas to death." Yeah, which actually isn't true. No, it's actually worse than that. Yeah, that idea plays down how horrific it truly is.
I don't understand why vegans say that, because it's actually worse.
Yeah, much worse than that. Yeah. I mean, if they were all killed in the gas chamber, everything that came afterwards would be kind of circumstantial. But it's the fact that they're very much alive.
So why the hell do vegans say that?
I suppose it's just. I don't really know. I guess they're just repeating what someone else has said at the end of the day.
Remember when Earthling Ed ended up being on the Moral Maze, the woman was saying, "You're just evoking the Holocaust to kind of give us a punch in the stomach." So is that what it is?
Maybe that's where it is. Maybe the correlation, because obviously it's similar technology, that's what it did. Yeah, but no, in this instance, they are very much alive, and that's the intention.
It's not similar though, is it? Because I mean, ironically, with the Holocaust, the actual Jewish Holocaust, they actually employed the German pest control company to create the gas, and that was to kill. Whereas the idea of the gas chambers in Britain and elsewhere now is to stun, right?
Yeah.
It's a different thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just a similar technology of being placed in somewhere and a gas is being introduced. That's the similar part of it.
Yeah.
But in terms of the methodology, yeah, it wants a very different outcome.
Yeah, they talked about that in pigment. CO2 is used. Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah.
But in terms of I did a paper on it back in, I can't remember now, 2006.
I'm not sure how that would work. I don't know the weights, you see, because obviously the gas chambers are designed where it's almost like an elevator that goes down because carbon dioxide is quite a low, heavy gas. So I suppose the argon would have to be a very similar weight. Otherwise, they have to redesign all the chambers.
Yeah, Cyclone B, you're right there. I mean, the interesting thing about that is if you read Zygmunt Bauman, Modernity and the Holocaust, it's really fascinating about the fact that, they did kind of engage the pest control. You see, the thing is they saw Jews as kind of vermin.
Yes, vermin, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
An invasive species, right?
Anyway, we're getting way off track now, I
Yeah.
think. So.
We'll get fixed on talking about that otherwise. But anyway, yeah, thank you so much, everyone. We will be back next week to talk about the Vegan Society through the 60s, I guess.
Right. Well, we should be well prepared because we already did that.
Yeah, well, I did quite a bit of research again today, so we should definitely be prepared. I will hopefully try and see if I can get the way to stream it from my computer so that I can change some of the slides and we can show some of the things that we're talking about. I've tried a number of times and my microphone seems to be too loud, but I've had a suggestion of someone else today that I'm going to try and hopefully that'll work.
Well, like talk lower.
No, I play it through a different system essentially. So TikTok receives my audio through a different method than what it currently does.
Are you still there, Ronnie?
Yeah, I am still here. Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to say good night, mate.
Yeah, good night, and we'll all be together again in a week's time.
If we're still alive.
Yeah.
Dreadful idea, but no.
Take care, everyone. Speak to you
Take care.
soon.
Bye bye then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.